Today we'll be discussing the essay paper which was asked in the UPSC mains examination this year, and I've been asked to do a review of the question paper and an analysis of the topics which seem to have perplexed and confounded a lot of the aspirants, although I'm surprised to learn this because I find that the examination, at least the essay examination, was very much on pattern with what can be expected. In fact, if you take this year's question paper and place it alongside the past 2 or 3 years question paper, you will find that it appears as if they are picking topics just from the same set of quotations or statements which they have. They're just one data bank out there which they just pick out from at random and then give you to write about. Another very important question which I'll be discussing in detail today is how to deal with philosophical essays. This is something which I would like to put to rest for the benefit of my students once and for all, such that after the session is over, after today's session is over, you will never be confounded or perplexed or troubled by it, and you will know exactly what philosophical essays are and what they aren't. You'll also know how exactly to deal with them. Now, we'll be taking this question paper as our template, and we'll be discussing all of these questions in some detail, in whatever amount of detail that time can afford us. And we'll try to figure out how should they have been handled. What do the essay topics mean? What is the heart of the essay topic? Can they be deconstructed or analyzed with some techniques which can be used repeatedly to give you a promised and a predictable result? The answer is yes, and we'll deal with those things in some detail today. So, the first thing I need to tell you before we begin is that you have to understand that all essay topics can be deconstructed. Deconstruction is a technique which I describe in quite some detail in my book, but also in the lesson, in an article which I am linking below. You can go and check it out and understand how it works. Deconstruction essentially means that every essay topic that the UPSC gives you, or by the nature of the questions which are asked in the essay paper, these are all analytical essays. And analytical essays are usually centered around debate, not usually, always centered around some debate which lends itself to analysis, of course, which is your job in the essay paper. You are the person who analyzes, describes, understands and transforms the essay into a readable format for the reader, which in your case is the UPSC examiner. This analogy is a useful one which I like to take. You see, if you were to regard the essay topic as a camera, which you might think of as one object, but you might realize if you deconstruct it part by part and set all those parts nicely in an arrangement, realize that it was not one object ever. It contained a lot of different subcomponents which came together to form it. An essay topic is like that. They'll give you a ambiguous sounding, a philosophical sounding, ambiguous sounding abstract statement of sorts, and you will have to analyze it, write an essay about it. Essentially what you're doing in the essay is exactly what has been done to this camera. Take the essay topic, deconstruct it into its main parts, which we'll learn about just very shortly. Then display those main parts, arrange your ideas very nicely, very beautifully, very organically, such that they all make sense, such that they're all connected. This is of course structure and flow, which I'm talking about. And create in 1,000 words the best possible arrangement of the essay topic which you can. This is your job as an essay writer, which has been done and which is depicted in this deconstructed camera in this image. Deconstruction, when it comes to essay topic, boils down to a very simple rule. Every essay topic, almost all essay topic, I would say 99%, can be broken down into thing 1 and thing 2. Thing 1 and thing 2 are just the two main things that the essay topic is about. This is absolute simplification and it is very powerful. You can do this deconstruction on almost any topic asked in the UPSC examination. In fact, in the article which I'll link, you will find all the previous year question papers, many of them deconstructed into thing 1 and thing 2, and you can clearly see what thing 1 is, what thing 2 is, and so on. Take for instance this topic which you will find mentioned in this image: technology cannot replace manpower. Now, this is a very simple example, and you know that the essay topic is about two things. One is technology, other is manpower, right? It's about the relationship between technology and manpower. Thing 1 is technology, thing 2 is manpower. It's as simple as that. we'll take this technique and we'll try to figure out how to deconstruct all the essay topics which the UPSC asked this time, and we'll see how effective this can be and how it helps us penetrate into the heart of the essay, right? The first topic you find in the UPSC paper this time is this one. The process of self-discovery has been technologically outsourced. Sounds abstract enough, but if you give it just some thought, just deconstruct it, forget about the statement for an instant, and forget about what it means, forget about writing an essay about it. Just tell me what you think are the two main things which this essay topic is composed of. Two main components of it, the two main things which constitute it, regardless of whatever the statement might imply. It's very clear. The two things are self-discovery and technology. Thing one, in this case, is self-discovery. Thing two is technology. I'm just using simple deconstruction. You can do this and you'll find that all the topics in the essay paper can be deconstructed likewise. But here's where deconstruction gets interesting. It helps us get deeper into the heart of the essay. Here is the next step you do. You ask yourself, after obtaining what is thing one and thing two, write it down on a piece of paper. Thing one is self-discovery, thing two is technology. You will notice that the essay topic describes a relationship between thing one and thing two. All of them will do that. What is the relationship which has been implicated or stated in the topic itself? We don't have to agree with this statement yet. We don't have to form our opinions just yet. This is where most aspirants lack. They quickly jump to conclusions and perhaps think that if they start writing, good ideas will come, but it inevitably never happens because it takes a certain amount of premeditation and writing, rough work, so to speak, to actually get down all your thoughts in one place about it, filter out the best ones and then organize them. So we'll do some of that today. And by the end of this session, you will know exactly how to do it. We have established it's about self-discovery and technology. If you attempted this topic, or if you were to dwell on this topic and write about this topic, what would you write about? This is the question. What do you think is the heart of this topic? What is it referring to? What is the debate here? Here is the debate, and I'll give you some ideas about what it actually means. So if you are thinking on the same themes, then it is very likely that you're on the right track and you will end up getting decent marks. Of course, subject to the manner in which you have organized your ideas, because that also carries its own weightage in the examination. I'm just talking about the content and what might be included, what might be a good theme, what the central motifs of this topic are, and I'll do that for every topic which was asked in the examination. You see, self-discovery in humans is a process which begins in childhood and it goes on as the child develops. And we never really stop discovering ourselves. When a baby is born, the human infant will go through certain stages of cognitive development where a sense of self develops. Now, this sense of self is a strange thing. It is not a biological organ. It develops when we interact with our environment. It develops when our environment interacts with us, when our parents, our caregivers nurture us, speak to us, touch us, hold us. It forms in our mind a boundary in which you realize, slowly the human infant realizes, that I am separate from the environment, that there is a border here, that there is a boundary, and this boundary is my body. And I cannot exceed this boundary. I can use it to explore my environment and so on and so forth. This is the process of basic self-identity formation, you see. It is very important for you to have some understanding of this process in order to do justice to this topic. This topic goes one step ahead. It says that this process of self-discovery has been technologically outsourced. It says, in other words, that there is a relationship between the process of self-discovery and technology. And technology is somehow perhaps intervening, and it has become a factor basically in the journey, in the process. Is it a positive factor? Is it a negative factor? Should it be allowed? Are all topics for later? Are all debates for later? We don't want to get into that, and nor should your thoughts go into that before you've understood it, analyzed it thoroughly. All it says is that the process has been outsourced. So we have to figure it out. if this is a good thing or a bad thing, or perhaps what could be done to make it a better thing, and how do you do that? So in this topic, a very well-written article, an essay, I will link in the video description. You can go through it. It touches all, mainly all themes, but not all. So what are the themes that this topic should touch upon? It should touch upon human development. It should touch upon the identity formation. It should touch upon the role of our peer groups, our societies, our environments in shaping who we are. It should also focus on the journey which human beings go through, which help them in becoming self-aware, in self-discovery. The process never stops, does it? Like I said. But how does technology now come into the picture, and how does it become a factor in it? You see, now the way humans interact has completely been changed thanks to technology. Social media is a very important theme which must come into your discussion somewhere along in the discussion of this topic. We form our identities by the perception of others, right? You start to realize that after a while that the way you think about yourself is different from the way others think about you, right? And the way other people label you slowly becomes your identity. There is a relationship between yourself, your sense of self, and the feedback that others are giving you about yourself. It's a process which goes to and fro, right? You form your identity based on that input partially, and when you give your feedback and output, forms the identity of the other person who is influenced by you. Technology is changing that, because now you have a social interaction which has never existed before. You are not necessarily growing up in a familiar environment anymore. You are growing up in social media, and the level of interaction which people had earlier, which was a fundamental requirement in self-discovery, is now no longer used in as much as, at least to the extent that it was. And so you'd have to touch upon these themes. You'd also have to touch upon the fact that now with technology, so much of biofeedback is now available. You have smartwatches which can depict and detect your heartbeat. You have biosensors which can tell you your mood. Somebody just created, I think, an innovation in which the lightings of the room, the Internet of Things, the lighting of the room and everything can modulate itself according to your mood. And this mood can be determined by the signals from your smartwatch, right? All of these things you keep hearing about, all the science fiction-y stuff, is how technology is actually impacting us and our sense of self-discovery. And another theme which you might want to insert is that we discover ourselves mostly when we go through challenges, when we go through obstacles, and when we overcome them. In fact, there has been plenty of research on this. A very popular research in this regard was done by Piaget, right? Piaget and Erik Erikson. These are two very famous psychologists, cognitive psychologists, who did some groundbreaking research on the process of self-discovery on children, and so that led to the entire gamut of social psychology as we see today. So if we discover ourselves through challenges and obstacles, and technology constantly strives toward making things better, smoother, easier for us, then how is this self-discovery going to occur? How is it going to occur in the confines of a home for a student who's sitting there learning lectures and has no interaction with his or her peers, right? Which all of us have had, right? Things have changed. Technology has changed. COVID has changed many things. All of these themes can be spoken about, and you may ultimately conclude with a very synthesis-based, a very holistic kind of argument, so to speak, in the end, which you can help yourself, and your analysis can lend itself a lot of support from that. You can say that self-discovery was always a part of our human tradition and human culture, and it is never going to go away. It's only the way in which it is done now that is changing. And as humans progress and as technology progress, in as much as technology is a tool, every tool has its effect on the user of the tool, and it's going to have its effect on us. The question is, how do we help speed up or improve the process of self-discovery by using technology? Can we use big data? Can we use artificial intelligence to predict if a personality, while it's growing up, is developing some disturbances, is developing some mental issues, is likely to develop schizophrenia, depression in the future. Can we use technology to help the process of self-discovery of the people who are having trouble in that journey? Can we use it to enhance the self-discovery process of people? Can we use it to perhaps help older people begin to discover themselves again? All of these themes can be used, and a very nice conclusion can be drawn from it. So that is how you would do, or at least how I would attempt this topic.
Moving now to the other topic, and you'll notice that the topics are abstract and that they're not about particulars. They're not like general studies mains questions about particular thing where your knowledge is tested and so on. These are ambiguous and abstruse enough and abstract enough, to mean a lot of things. They are ambiguous, meaning that they cannot be tied down to one particular thing. They could be applied to many things in the world, and it's not particularly clear if the topic is about one event or the other. And I think most aspirants make the mistake of calling such topics philosophical topics. These are not philosophical topics. They're just abstract topics. Philosophical topics are topics which pertain to philosophy, and out of the list of topics which you saw this year, only one is a properly philosophical topic, and that is topic number 4. The real is rational and the rational is real. I'll give some time to this separately. This is a proper philosophical topic because it is a philosophical statement made by a famous and renowned philosopher called Hegel in the 18th century, and it has been the topic of much debate and research in philosophy ever since. There's a lot of history behind this statement. This is a proper philosophical statement. Even otherwise, if you forget the speaker of the topic, whether it was Hegel or it was Leibniz or any other personality, the topic itself does not lend itself to easy discussion. And like we spoke about deconstruction, thing 1, thing 2, here thing 1 is real, or you could say the reality, or thing 2 is rational or rationality. They are not easily defined. These are technical concepts in philosophy, in metaphysics and ontology, which need to be understood, and it can only be understood after some study, some proper academic rigorous study in philosophy. But that is not to discourage you or to give you any source of worry. It only means that what you think of as philosophical essays are not philosophical essays. You might encounter one or two, but most of them are just abstract and very, very amenable to your control, to the scrutiny of your thoughts. And when you apply techniques well enough, when you understand the topic, and when you know how exactly to sift through the maze of the topic and all the intertwined concepts you can then untie, you learn that in some of the techniques. And one of the techniques which is my favorite is called dimensional analysis. This is a technique specifically for what you call are philosophical essays. And dimensional analysis is you understanding, taking a topic from many different dimensions. Dimensions in this context are different ways of looking at the world. You understand that different people have different perspectives, different viewpoints. Take the example of COVID, for instance. A philosopher would have a different idea and take on it, right? And a psychologist would have a different take on it and would perhaps think of it as the biggest social experiment ever conducted in modern history, where humans, the most social of animals, were confined to their homes, and it has forced them, or a virus has forced them to completely restructure their entire social dynamic. So that's interesting from the point of view of a social psychologist, but from the point of view of an economist, it's a completely different phenomena, isn't it? And it is a very different phenomena from the point of view of an ethicist, for example. So what are the different dimensions which you must consider or you can consider to understand and unravel a topic? There are 6 fundamental universal dimensions, which I describe in detail in my article in my blog, which I have linked below. You can go and read it, understand it. The 6 techniques are called STEPPE techniques. STEPPE is the acronym, STEPPE, and the S stands for the spiritual dimension. These are all dimensions. T stands for temporal dimension, economic dimension, philosophical dimension, psychological dimension, and ethical dimension. Notice that philosophical dimension is just one of them. If you were to understand an abstract topic, it is best to look at it from all of these different viewpoints so that you understand that it's not just one thing. You can't just keep on going about abstract things and not talk about particulars, right? And when you do, how are you going to organize those particulars? Well, the dimensions are one way to organize those particulars, one way to understand the intertwined debates, the intertwined things, the intertwined arguments embedded in all these abstract topics, which are not philosophical topics, they are abstract topics. Coming to the next abstract topic in the question paper this year, your perception of me is a reflection of you, my reaction to you is an awareness of me. This topic also is very similar and mirrors many of the themes discussed about in the first essay. This essay topic is talking about how we form impressions of ourselves and how others form impression of us and how that reflects upon our own dynamics, our own interpersonal, intrapersonal dynamic. I don't want to get into technical words, so I'll simplify it for you. You see, the fact of the matter is simple. Humans are deeply social creatures. Like I said, you form your sense of self by the feedback of others, and you do the same for the others. This is how social dynamic works. This is how stereotyping works. This is how we label people. This is how we judge other people. And we do so incessantly, right? So the humans are deeply social creatures. We learn not only who we are, but also our genders, gender roles. The way a boy is supposed to behave versus the way a girl is supposed to behave, even if it's artificially, culturally constructed, is given down by society, by environment. It doesn't exist as such biologically. It depends on how the child is reared, on what expectations are conveyed to the child, and how the child then form their identity, their gender identity, their personality identity, their level of self-confidence, and so on and so forth. So that entire debate is very much similar and same from the last question, the last topic that we discussed. This topic is taking it one level further and talking about it from the point of view of a mature personality, someone whose sense of self and emotional intelligence is a very important theme here, is developed enough to realize that this is the case. You see, it is one thing to just hear it academically and theoretically that, okay, fine, our perceptions are, self-reinforced and so on. This sounds like a bunch of fancy words. It's just completely another thing to realize it truly. And this requires metacognition. You see, metacognition, again, don't get boggled down by technical words. Metacognition, just you thinking about thinking. Here, you are thinking about your perception of somebody else. Say, for example, you are in a bad mood and you're angry with yourself. You've done something stupid perhaps, or you think so, and you're not feeling too happy with yourself. And you go out in the street, you find there's a lot of traffic. And before you know it, you have displaced your anger, you have displaced your frustration on some other passenger stuck in traffic just like you. You lost your empathy, you lost your cool, and you started to displace and project all your anger and frustrations with yourself on that other person, on that traffic, on the traffic cops, on everything, on India, on the entire society, and the reason why traffic exists. And you curse and you yell, and you have completely lost your sense of self at that time. You understand that what you were labeling other people and the traffic was just a reflection of you. In fact, the reflection of you at that time, a bad mood, got reflected and got transferred into you labeling the entire world as bad. The same thing happens, in fact, the opposite thing happens when you're in a good mood, when nothing can shake you from positivity. And everything, even the worst things, appear to you as opportunities. You've had both these experiences. So you know that the way you label things, people, situations, is not so much the situation. It's you. It's you and the way you're labeling things. And the realization that, yes, it is actually me. I keep labeling things around me. They're not good or bad inherently at all. It's just me constantly projecting my own desires, emotions, and thoughts and expectations on everything around me. This awareness is being spoken about here. This awareness is an aspect of emotional intelligence. Now, I should tell you, I suppose, what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is understanding, knowledge, and perception of yours and others' emotions. There are two aspects to emotional intelligence. the way you read somebody else's emotions, how quickly you are able to empathize with the other person, how quickly you can gauge what that person must be feeling is emotional intelligence, but also how quickly can you recognize what you are feeling. And you catching yourself in moments of anger or in moments of making a mistake or while creating a bad decision or perhaps making a bad decision, catching yourself in the act is very tough. This requires self-awareness. This is what is being spoken about in this essay topic. Your perception of me is a reflection of you. That basically means if you think of me as a good person, as a person who's generous, it means there is some positivity in you, so that which allows you to see the positivity in the world and me, because I might not be good or bad. I might be a combination of all of these things. And because you, in the split second of the time available to you to form a judgment, have to form some judgment, will probably form a judgment based on your perceptions and biases more than you know about me. You don't have any data as such to form objective opinions about anybody. And so we form our opinions based on mostly our internal signals without even realizing it. This is the reason why you have stereotypes. This is the reason why you have xenophobia. This is the reason humans have in groups and out groups, and we have always, a conflict between the two sides. This is the first part of the essay. What is it about? The perception of self versus the perception of others. These are the two main things that it is about. Like I said, thing one and thing two. Perception of self is that part of emotional intelligence which I spoke about. Perception of others is the other part of emotional intelligence. Both of them are about emotional intelligence. The higher the emotional intelligence, the higher both will be. And the essay topic essentially says this, and you are supposed to then analyze this in some detail. How this works. This, of course, would require you to be very intuitive and insightful into the psyche, into the mind, into how emotions are projected. If you are a student of psychology, if you have any grounding in psychology, this topic would have given you some advantage. Art is in the eyes of the beholder, they say. That's one famous quotation. And that also reflects the same thing. It's not just about us projecting our own internal states onto other people and labeling them and, just putting them in cages, in compartments which don't really exist. It's about how we perceive everything else as well, And so even art, when what artists do is try to put this on display to demonstrate to you, when they create an abstract work of art, is when you see it, you project your own mind onto it. In fact, psychologists use it extensively in what are called projective techniques. And what they'll do is perhaps show you an abstract ink blot, which doesn't really have any meaning, just an abstract blot. And you can always find patterns in it. Humans are pattern finding machines. We're always looking for patterns. We're looking for patterns in the constellations. We end up looking for patterns in that ink blot also. And the psychologist then is supposed to ask you certain questions. And based on your questions and how you interpret it, do you see an angel or do you see a bat? Depending on what you see in that abstract thing, you get certain ratings and they try to diagnose you. In fact, the essay paper in the UPSC exam is nothing but an apperception test in which they've given you a bunch of abstract topics, and the way you reflect is supposed to give them some insight into the way your mind works and how organized you can be with your thoughts, how analytical you can be, how much justice you can do to different stakeholders, so on and so forth. Coming to the third topic, an interesting topic. I would say one of my favorites from the list of topics this time. The philosophy of wastefulness is utopian, while materialism is a chimera. We'll use deconstruction straight away, right off the bat. And I'll ask you what you think thing one is and what you think thing two is. It's very clear. You can see it just without even getting into the analysis and too much of cogitation about it. You know that thing one is materialism or wantlessness, whatever. Thing two is materialism. That is the heart of the topic. And you have successfully figured out, if you've done this, the two main things which the debate is about. So the essay topic, like I said, the heart of the essay topic is going to be about that relationship between thing one and thing two. Now, this essay topic says that philosophy of wastelessness is utopian, materialism is a chimera. So there is really no clear distinction as to which philosophy one should follow. And we'll, of course, discuss what these philosophies are. And it's a very interesting topic for that reason. Wantlessness is thing one. What is wantlessness? Philosophy of wantlessness. Philosophy of wantlessness is, I would say, very similar to the idea of Buddhism and Jainism, which shuns desire. This is a debatable, contentious thing, but the philosophy of wantlessness is essentially you being ascetic, you being very, very minimalistic in your life, you wanting to quell desire so as not to desire things. And so, if there is no desire, there is no suffering, like the Buddha said. This is the philosophy of wantlessness. Achieve wantlessness and you'll be happy. That philosophy promises. Whether or not that's true is a different debate and topic of much contention, as well as it is about much experience. It is something to be experienced in order for you to actually gain an insight into that. But we know the philosophies and we can definitely use our minds to analyze them and figure out a very, very good essay on this topic. What wantlessness is the idea that desire is the root of evil. And of course, why is this a problem? It says that the philosophy of wantlessness is utopian. Of course, it is criticizing that philosophy, and this topic is saying that it doesn't exist. You can't have wantlessness. It is in the nature of humans to desire. And if you were writing an essay topic about this, you could touch upon the theme of evolution. You could touch upon the theme of our primal instincts, of survival, of protection, of social bonding, and how we are biologically driven towards these things, and how it is really not up to us to be wantless. If we were wantless, we would stop progressing. There are many arguments which you can have, which you can place to refute this idea of wantlessness. By refuting it, you would actually be explaining it, because the topic wants you to explain to some extent why wantlessness is utopian. And is it utopian or not is also a topic that we'll see. It's very interesting. The debate can go both ways. What is the philosophy of materialism? You say, okay, fine. Wantlessness doesn't exist. I cannot give up on desire. I cannot spend my life in meditation, and I have to be involved with my family and in this world. And this world brings with it its own Mayajal, and the technical word, in fact, in Buddhism is Maya for this world. And it brings that, and it's like a package. You get the package along with it, but also some very good things come with it. Some beautiful, elegant, and memorable things which make human life worth living, such as family, love, aesthetics, opportunities, learning, dignity. All of these things come with Maya. You can't have those without Maya. So what do you do with it? Do you agree with it or do you disagree with it? You analyze it and you leave it there and you move on to the next part for now. You figured out that wantlessness is a philosophy of desire, and it doesn't work, and you basically criticize it to some extent. And then you say, but the opposite of it is also equally empty. Materialism is a chimera, essentially means the same thing. It says that materialism also does not deliver on its promises, and that materialism also leaves us empty. And materialism itself doesn't really satisfy our basic desire. It is not the philosophy to base your life on, just as wantlessness is not the philosophy to completely base your whole life around because of its drawbacks. What are the drawbacks of materialism? Well, you could write an entire book about that, and you can take examples of all kinds. You can input social media, technology, whatever you want to input, from COVID to World War I, II, III in materialism, and you can go on and on about it. It is a vast topic, but the essence of the topic, which is important for this essay topic, is what materialism does to us as humans. Does it deliver as the final end philosophy of human life? Is it something to be, isn't an anthem which can be followed, which will lead to some happiness at the end? The answer is most likely no. And materialism is therefore subject to many criticism. But it's always important not to agree or disagree with the essay topic outright. When you criticize materialism, you also must bring it into balance by saying that it's not just a chimera, it is essential. Without materialism, modern life is not possible. Without materialism, an economy is not possible. Without materialism, there would be no COVID vaccines. Without materialism, we would not have this complicated, technologically advanced, interconnected world. You see, like I said, it comes in a package. It comes with a package, and materialism, of course, with its own drawbacks, comes with a package. There are some side effects to it, but there are some very good things about it as well. So, what do you do with wantlessness on one side and materialism on the other side? What could be a really good synthesis to this essay topic? And that synthesis, a custom made, beautiful synthesis, which would really hit the bullseye if you have been able to make the mark, is the philosophy of minimalism. Minimalism, just to give you a basic idea, is an idea which started to originate in Japan in the Western culture recently, in recent years. And it says that material possessions are not going to give you happiness. So give up on material possessions, only keep what you absolutely need. Everything else, everything redundant, you should ruthlessly cut out. There's a very nice documentary on Netflix about it, and the internet is replete with minimalism and the philosophy and many people following it. And it says, but it doesn't say that you should detach yourself or that you should become wantless. It just says that minimize the possessions you have according to the needs which you have, and continue to exist in the material world, continue to exist in the economy, contribute, have jobs, have families, do what you need, but only what you need. Do not fall prey to consumerism, it says. It's a beautiful synthesis because it balances being sophisticated and being technologically advanced in a country like our country is going in that direction now, and other countries have already reached there, and balancing that modernity, balancing the fast pace of life that everybody experiences in such countries with the cutting back of consumerism. That balances the purpose and the fulfillment which humans require, and that rids oneself of a lot of unnecessary choices, a lot of unnecessary baggage and burden, and so forth and so forth. And uh, according to most people, when minimalism is followed to a healthy degree, it leads to improvement in psychological well-being. So this is the sum and substance of this topic, and this would be a excellent synthesis if you use something like this, and if you've used the words, some of the themes and the words like minimalism which I have described, then you're on the right track, and you can be reasonably sure that you hit the target well enough to get a decent score. Now comes the fourth topic, and I think the one topic which stands out from the rest in this year's question paper as the most dangerous topic, in my honest opinion, to attempt, because it is hard, it's difficult, it's not easy to capture, it is not easy to speak about definitively. It requires a special kind of knowledge. All of these reasons make this topic hard. I'll talk about it a bit and also explain how you will be able to make something out of it, even if you don't have the technical background required to really address it in a truly comprehensive sense. So, like I mentioned before, the statement itself is attributed to Hegel, who was a very influential, highly influential German philosopher, Western philosopher, and he he had a philosophy which is called absolute idealism. We can't get into the details because it would take weeks or perhaps months. In fact, people and Hegel scholars spend years understanding his ideas, and Hegel is considered one of the hardest philosophers to understand even today. He said this statement in the context of explaining his philosophy, but at this point, we will ignore Hegel and we will try to capture this essay topic regardless of its speaker. We will try to understand that if a topic like this is encountered, what can be done about it? What does it mean? you know, as the smart person that you are, that deconstruction will quickly tell you that it's about two things. It's about reality and rationality. The real is rational, the rational is real. It's about this relationship between these two things. This relationship between reality and rationality, whatever those terms mean. We'll figure out soon enough that those terms are very, very hard to define. There exists no definition which can capture what reality truly is. We don't know. We don't know what rationality truly is also. What is reality, right? The reality, well, reality, there are a number of ways to describe it. Everything that you experience that exists in the world, in the material sense, is real. But there is always a confusion. Even with the material world, your conception of reality, say you have a mechanistic conception of reality, you say atoms are real and the world is made of atoms and it's made of stuff. Stuff is real. Oxygen is a molecule, it's a stuff. There are similar atoms of different atomic weight which form every single thing in the universe, and that is reality. You say, and you speak like a physicist and you describe it like that. But then again, it's not very clear what it is, because physics reveals now that even particles, subatomic particles, quantum particles, which atoms are composed of, seemingly pop out of nowhere. They exist out of nowhere. It's not clear what reality is, even according to the physicists who are in the business of defining reality, let alone the philosophers, because they only end up going round and round in definitions. It's not clear what reality is. In fact, this topic gets incredibly interesting and very perplexing, very mysterious. I honestly love talking about it and reading about it. There is a simulation hypothesis which is being taken seriously in scientific circles. There is the idea that this reality that you experience might not be real at all, and that in actual reality, you're just a character in a video game, in a simulation. So the idea is that there are layers of intelligence and civilization. So the civilization above us has created this entire universe in their computer, just like you can create characters in your video game and you can control those characters. Those advanced beings have created this entire world, and the characters in it are us. They have created the universe, so to speak. And so, if that is the case, then what is reality? And I could go on and on about this. What is reality when you're dreaming? It all appears real. In fact, even physical sensations might be experienced in your body when you are experiencing a dream. There is no distinction between what's happening in the dream versus when you don't have the knowledge that you are actually lying down in a bed somewhere. And then at that point in time, reality is the dream. What happens when you put on virtual VR goggles, virtual reality goggles? Is reality just the sense perceptions and the sensory inputs which your brain is getting? Or is it something else? Can it even be understood by humans? Do we have access to it? Open debates. Nobody knows. Difficult to capture. Very difficult. You could impose your own thoughts about it and write about what you think about reality, but nobody really cares about your opinions because it truly is an open topic. You can't shine light on something which has not been decided or something which doesn't exist. You might be able to write beautifully on it, but the chances are low that you will be able to comprehensively cover it to the extent that it has been actually discussed about and understood by the people who are in the business of doing so. Those people are physicists, even mathematicians, philosophers, to some extent psychologists. That's reality. Not, we don't know what it is. It could mean a number of things. Religion has something else to say about it. Science has something else to say about it. There are a number of hypotheses, number of ideas. Whatever it is, let us just assume that reality is whatever we take to be real. Let us just say it like that. Whatever in the common sense of the word we mean by reality. Now, the other part of the topic, thing two, is rationality. What is rationality? How do you define it? Because the essay topic is going to ask us to compare these two. Rationality is a subset of logic. Human brains and minds are capable of understanding logic and playing with its rules and figuring out various structures using logic. A square is such a structure. Uses simple logic. Every line has 90-degree perpendicular. You make that, you'll get a square invariably wherever you do that in the universe. What is rationality apart from that? It's us making quick decisions about whether to invest in cryptocurrencies or not. It's you making a decision about how to spend your time. It's our minds and this executive function that we constantly do, the part of the brain which is the prefrontal cortex where all this advanced thinking happens, the type of thinking which animals cannot do. Seemingly you're planning, organizing, structuring, memorizing, all this logic and intelligence that you use in consuming your content for the UPSC exam, for example, is all rationality. All of that is within the ambit of rationality. How is the real rational and how is the rational real? Is reality rational? Is the question. Deep philosophical question, very mysterious question. Nobody definitively knows that. Well, reality might or might not be rational. Of course, we know, and with a lot of in a lot of depth, physicists have figured out and have confirmed that yes, nature follows mathematical rules. Nature follows mathematical patterns on certain scales, but on certain scales it doesn't. It might appear to you that the laws of nature are very fixed, but as you look closer, you realize that they are not so fixed after all. Take, for instance, the idea of the atoms, like I mentioned. Now, if you take two atoms of hydrogen, combine them, you'll get helium, invariably. If you combine three of them, you'll get whichever element comes after that, and so on and so forth. Integers are being added and they're leading to different elements. Those different elements you'll find look like different things and they form the whole world. That appears to be very rational, logical structure which nature is following, which reality is following. But then you look at quantum physics and whatever science is revealing to us, and you realize that it's probabilistic. It's not a simple mechanism of yes or no. It doesn't work on binary logic, reality. It works on some form of fuzzy logic, and it breaks down on certain scales. Nobody knows that if there is a grand unified theory out there which can explain everything. We don't know if nature is rational or not. Speaking about rationality, in order for you to do justice to this topic, you would have to have some idea of mathematics also. And you would know that there are some things called irrational numbers. Do irrational numbers exist in nature? And if nature is rational, then why does it require irrational numbers? And this is an interesting segue into this discussion. You might have heard about Pythagoras and Pythagoras theorem, of course, you would have heard about. With the right triangles, you can calculate the sides of the hypotenuse given any two of them. The Pythagoreans were religious about rationality. They prayed to mathematics. They worshipped mathematics. And they were discovering mathematical structures, and they had a whole temple and an entire cult, of mathematically inclined people. And somebody there discovered that the square root of 2 is not a rational number. This completely shook their world, and they found themselves in complete disarray, their entire faith completely challenged by these ideas. So it's not clear what rationality is either, right? Take it from the point of view of psychology, and you might say that humans are rational. They make rational decisions. They make decisions based on logic. They weigh their benefits and disadvantages, and they take decisions. But this is also not true. Behavioral economics now tells us, research from psychology tells us, humans are not at all rational. In most of the cases, decisions are based on hunches, on intuitions, on our past biases, on cognitive illusions, which we don't even spot. So how could you say that humans are rational, right? And how reality is rational? This is that type of a debate. This is that type of a topic. So if you stayed away from it, then good for you. Coming now to the next one. Hand that rocked the cradle rules the world. This is a poem by a famous poet written somewhere in the 17th or the 18th century. I'm not particularly sure, and it doesn't matter. But the root of this essay topic is the idea of nurturance. Please note that the hand that rocks the cradle is essentially the hand of a mother. It's the mother who rocks the cradle, although now gender roles are changing and it's the father also who participates in child rearing as much as the mother. But that's a separate issue. We can talk about that in the essay somewhere later. But the idea of the essay topic, what it says, and in fact, if you read the poem, what the poem says, even without reading the poem, you can pretty much figure out what it means. A hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. It is talking about this fundamental feminine energy in the universe. We refer to an ocean as her, as a female, not a female, a feminine force. In fact, the ocean was angry. She was angry that day. She was turbulent. Sailors use that type of language. Mother Nature is a feminine force. When Mother Nature gets angry, she destroys everything. Why do we use femininity and associate it with this type of a nurturing relation? Because that is the most fundamental relation which humans know. The bond between mother and infant, mother and child, is the fundamental driving force of development, of the way humans ultimately form personalities, or when they form fractured personalities, are due to many times neglect and actually neglectful mothers. If the mother is neglectful, then research in development psychology says the likelihood of the child developing disorders and psychological issues, mental issues is very high. Nurturance is fundamental to the world. It is fundamental because of many different dimensions of it, like I say. It is the fundamental driving force of our world. And in fact, it's a very powerful metaphor by which we understand our whole world. Mother Nature, we use that as a metaphor to refer to this femininity. Now, what does it mean and what are the two things that it is about? The two things it is about is essentially nurturing and the world and what the relationship is. The poem itself and the essay topic basically emphasizes and really elevates the feminine force of the world to the ruler of the world. And it says that it's absolutely the thing which rules the world. Now, again, like I've been mentioning, don't just agree or disagree with the topic. Don't be taken in by the statement and think that your job is to agree. It's not to agree, it's to analyze, it's to figure out. Like I said, it's to deconstruct, it is to untwine the different debates which are intertwined in it. In this case, what are the debates intertwined with it? There is one debate about how we figure out what rules the world. And in as much as this world is concerned, the world we live in, the real world, it doesn't appear to be ruled by a feminine force. In fact, it's a highly patriarchal world even today where men have advantages over women which are not fair or based on any logic. You can bring that type of debate in the essay topic. You can talk about Mother Nature and you can talk about environment here. And you can say that the hand that rocks the cradle and the cradle on which humankind rests. We live on this planet and we live as on a tiny sliver of land on it, subject to the forces of Mother Nature. And we don't take Mother Nature seriously enough. And we should know and be wary of the fact that it is she who rules the world. It is her world that we are part of. And if we keep abusing this planet and this environment, she will just do away with us. She doesn't care, Mother Nature. You could talk about climate change in this context. You could talk about many other things. The whole idea is if you can capture this debate about nurturing versus the world in this topic, are you able to do that from different dimensions? And did you get to the heart of it? How many different perspectives did you bring out? Could you bring out? Like I mentioned, one is definitely the developmental psychological perspective. And of course, this is coming straight from the STEPI dimensions that I described earlier. STEPI standing for different dimensions, the spiritual, temporal, economic, philosophical, psychological, ethical, and so on. So the psychological perspective here is, of course, the developmental psychological process which humans go through, in which the level of nurturance and care which the child gets formulates and cements their personality and temperament for years to come. You see? And with many people who have had lasting impact on the world, you find extreme influence of mothers. Take Adolf Hitler, take Mahatma Gandhi. And like I mentioned, this determines what the person becomes to a large extent. So, as the hand that rocks the cradle finds herself in this world, the women of this world find themselves pushed and pulled through many turbulences into a world where they must manage their gender roles, their biologically uh, ordained roles of child rearing, but also now the difficult roles of uh, being financially independent. And with this added pressure, how does that affect the nurturing of our future generations? That topic and that theme can be touched upon. You can talk about it from a philosophical point of view and say, like I mentioned, that it's the universal feminine nature which is being spoken about, and since we are very much part of that system, we cannot divorce ourselves and think of ourselves as superior to it in any way, because it's a recipe for disaster. You can talk about the ethical dimension and also input some debates about climate change, the environment, and how we are affecting the planet, and how we are not paying enough respect to Mother Nature, and so on. In many different dimensions, you could analyze this essay and you could talk about this, but it centers around the issue of nurturing and how it affects the world. And you could perhaps come away with concluding about it, and you might say that the hand that rocks the cradle uh, rules the world to the extent that it impacts it. But in order for it to rule the world, if it, in as much as it rules the world, we don't realize that it does, perhaps, and we should. If the statement is true, then the first thing to do is to acknowledge the fact that the ruling force of this world is the maternal one, is the feminine one, and it is not the human made world which is the end on and be all. It is subject to Mother Nature's mercy, and just as the child is subject to the love and compassion and level of care of his or her mother, so are we subject to Mother Nature's hospitality, and we should not test those boundaries. Something like that you could conclude with. Coming now to the sixth essay topic, another interesting essay topic, also laden with science and technology. And this statement, what is research but a blind date with knowledge, was attributable to either Albert Einstein or Will Harvey, either one of the two. It's not clear who said it, and it's not important which one of them said it. But what is the heart of the essay topic, and what is thing one and thing two? I am sure by now you are able to deconstruct topic into thing one and thing two and immediately figure out what they are. And of course, I don't need to tell you that in this case, thing one is research, thing two is knowledge. What is the relationship between research and knowledge? That is what the essay topic centers around. It's a very interesting debate. It's a very interesting discussion. The idea of research and knowledge is distinguished in the sense that research is a mechanism to get to knowledge, right? And knowledge can be of many kinds. Knowledge could be insightful knowledge, intuitive knowledge, knowledge which you have inherently. But knowledge could be gained also from the world by following the scientific method. This topic revolves around the scientific method and the pros and cons, the pitfalls, the journey which it entails, and so on. What is research but a blind date with knowledge? What it essentially means is the principle of objectivity of scientific rationality, which says that you should not have any preconceptions about the world without evidence whatsoever, and you should research. And this is where the scientific method comes in. What is research? Essentially, it is you taking a hypothesis, an idea, an assertion. You take that and you do not form any ideas about it, but you collect some data on it. You figure out if it is true or false. It will either turn out to be true or false, or perhaps somewhere in the middle. But you must try to determine, free from your misconceptions, from the world around you, from the data and the facts around you, which can be solid and which can have basis in reality, what it has to say, what the world has to say about that thesis. That is research. Instead of you philosophizing about it, armchair philosophizing, or just meandering about in your thoughts, or being aesthetically, random and just having streams of consciousness. That's not research. When research is when you figure out what the world has to say about it and you put in place countermeasures to prove yourself wrong. If you have those in place, then you're doing research. If you have the option and the scrutiny, you're inviting scrutiny to be wrong, that is research. So what does research and what does the scientific mechanism, the scientific method mean? It essentially means it says essentially that in the process, go where the evidence leads. It says you go where the evidence leads in your research. If it leads to knowledge, it leads to knowledge. If it doesn't lead to knowledge, then it doesn't. And that is itself something to be taken note of. What is research but a blind date with knowledge? You, when attempting research, in the beginning of it, cannot expect it to lead you to a decision. It is an exploration. It is a discovery. It may or may not lead to anything. With scientists, they find it very interesting when it doesn't lead to anything, in fact. That itself is knowledge. If you have a hypothesis or an idea and it turns out to be wrong, that is not zero. That is knowledge. It means this is not the case. And this itself is knowledge. But you don't know what type of knowledge you will land up in when you talk about research, And so these are the topics themes that you could talk about. If you have any idea or inclination about science and the basic ideas of it, at least pop science, not technical science. I don't mean that you should have knowledge about the chemical formula of methane or benzene or know the molecular structure of mitochondria or anything. All I mean is just the basic idea of how science develops. Just a case in point is the research and the study on genetic technology, on DNA. Now, there was a physicist, a very famous physicist called Erwin Schrödinger. Schrödinger was a brilliant physicist and Nobel laureate, and he had the notion that, and this was in the 1940s, much before DNA was understood or even discovered. People had no idea that there is a thing called DNA which contains genetic knowledge. Erwin Schrödinger was thinking about how reproduction happens and how knowledge is transferred through nature, how when reproduction occurs, copies are made. And how does it occur that after a plant has fruit, the fruit contains enough information to go into the soil and expose its seeds, and the seeds somehow have the information to create a new plant, and those plants then have the information in their seeds to create new plants, and the same with humans and the same with other animals. How does this occur? How is this information getting transmitted on a physical basis? What exactly is going on? Something must be transferring somewhere. It can't just be all up in the air, right? He had the notion and he figured it out from the point of view of physics. He said that, see, there is some transfer of information going on genetically, and most likely, according to physics, that there is going to be a structure in the cell which is doing it, a molecule. Most likely that molecule will have a crystalline structure, he said, in a very famous book. His book was called What is Life? I have it here. It's one of my favorites. And so in that book, he describes that it will be a crystal type structure, a stable structure, which will have a double helix type structure. And he described that in his book without any research, without any ever having seen or having seen or heard about DNA and what it might look like. No notion at all. From pure thought and from pure knowledge alone, he deduced. So that's a different type of knowledge which he deduced. But then, a few years later, based on his analysis, Watson and Crick, and in fact Rosalind Franklin, was the first person to picture DNA, were looking for a structure like this, and they found an uncanny double helix type structure and they figured that this must be the molecule carrying the genetic information, and DNA was discovered. This was a monumental thing which led to many other things. Nobody knew at that time, or could Schrodinger ever have imagined what type of knowledge his research would lead to, nor the people who did research on the genetics ever would have thought that one day they would be figuring out the cure of viral DNA and figuring out how to defeat a virus which keeps transmitting between people very contagiously, and how it's wiping out, a percent of the population, which is exactly what's happening in COVID, right? So those researchers 5 years before this time would never have realized that they're going in that direction. So all of these themes you could have spoken about in this essay topic. Very interesting topic, heavily dependent on the scientific method, objectivity, rationality, and so on. The next essay topic is history repeats itself, first as a tragedy, second as a farce, is attributed to none other than Karl Marx. He was saying this statement and addressing somebody in some context. It didn't just exist on its own. This was not his philosophy as such. He was referring to somebody in a very popular article. This statement got kind of embossed in history, and it has become very popular. Uh, History repeats itself as a tragedy, second as a farce. What are the two things that it might be about? You know, history repeats, tragedy versus farce. These would be the two things it is about. And I suppose I should first tell you what a farce is and what a tragedy is. Of course, it's going to be about tragedy and a farce, and there is a subtle difference between them. A tragedy is something which is entertaining but climatic. It is something which has drama in it. It is something which has a twist to it. It is a change of events which you didn't expect, which leads to some melancholy, I would say. So that's tragedy. Tragedy is actually a form of theater, which was part of Roman and Greek theater. Tragedy was a form of theater, but let's not get into that. It basically says that history repeats itself. The first time it repeats itself, it looks like a tragedy. And humans think to themselves that it's a big deal and how tragic it is, how the gods, how nature, how the powers that be are playing games with humans, and how a similar thing could happen just again, and it's so uncanny. They treat it like a tragedy, but then it repeats another time, and when it repeats another time, then it looks like a farce. A farce is a cruel joke, a highly exaggerated, extravagant, ridiculous, absurd, improbable joke. It's like tragedy on steroids. So Karl Marx says that history repeats itself first as a tragedy, second as a farce. You have to analyze how this works and if it works that way. Does history repeat itself like that? At the heart of the essay topic, is about humans and their ability to learn from their own mistakes and their inability also thereof. History repeats itself first as a tragedy, as a farce. What was the first tragedy that repeated itself in history? I mean, we're living through so many even these days. Take World War One, for instance. World War One occurred, and it was absolutely devastating because society had technologically advanced to the point where we had devastating weapons. We had guns and machine guns, and people were slaughtered, and so many people lost their lives because two nations decided to fight. That was a unfortunate turn of events in the history of human affairs. Everyone agrees. But then it happened again, just a few years after that. It's like humans didn't learn at all from it. This time it was a tragedy. Then World War II, 6 million Jews were persecuted, exterminated. Millions more died, lost their lives. And for what? What exactly was the big deal about actually the world fighting itself? That was a tragedy. Will World War III be a farce if World War III happens? And so far, the United Nations is being successful to some degree to prevent it. There has not been a World War III, but the world has come close to it a number of times, including a number of times during the Cold War. But this is exactly what the United Nations is trying to do. We have seen the tragedy in World War One, two. We don't want the farce to happen, because if it happens now, then we won't have any other place to go to, because once the farce happens, it doesn't happen another time. It is likely to eliminate and wipe you out to the extent of you not having any options at all to speak about history and whatnot. Another example, the COVID waves. You had the first wave, then you had the second, then you had the third, tragic, and now you have the fourth and the fifth. It's almost comical now. This is the type of theme that this topic is discussing. You need to be good at thinking about examples from history which can highlight the failure or the success of human beings to learn from history. This is what this essay topic is about. You could use a variety of examples. You could use examples from your knowledge of, say, the Mughal Empire, or from world wars like I did, or from any other place. The point is how efficiently, how well organized was your analysis of how history works. This is how this topic is to be dealt with. It is about the movement of time and how this movement of time affects humans and how humans then react to it. This is what the essay topic is about. If you captured that, if you were able to talk about it, if you were perhaps able to conclude by saying that yes, humans are fallible, history does repeat itself as a tragedy and the second time as a farce, but it is within our power to turn that farce into a good humored joke rather than a toxic, devastating joke. Humans have that power. And so far, we've been able to exercise it because we haven't had a World War III. And you can talk about stuff like that. That would get you a decent score, a decent grounding. That topic is ambiguous enough to be, you can't really put it in any category. You could have spoken about it, but it has to be from the temporal dimension, more or less. Your analysis needs to be about time and how it affects people. Coming to the last topic, there are better practices to best practices. Interesting topic. Of course, thing one is better practices, thing two is best practices. Essay topic says that there are better things than best practices. Now, there is a language play here, and how could anything be better than best practices? The essay topic, the heart of the essay topic, is about originality versus creativity. You see, when you have best practices, it means you've taken something and you've given it a structure and you say, this is the best way to do it, just follow this. This works wonderfully well in places where you require stability, for example, the army. For example, any militarized or place, any place, in fact, where you require stability, it works. Best practices work. But they have a side effect. They stifle creativity, they stifle out of the box thinking. It stifles creativity and innovation. This is the type of discussion you need to have here about whether best practices, what are best practices, what good do they, what good are they, versus what good is it to not follow them and to go on a limb and do some creative thinking. So take, for example, again, take COVID, for instance. A best practice for COVID and avoiding it is to wash your hands, is to follow the safety protocol, the social distancing protocol, and so on, right? You don't need to get innovative with that. It's not a good idea to start to become innovative with something that is so vital and scientifically, proclaimed. What you might require creativity is, for instance, starting a business. That does not require, and it should not be done in the traditional way which has been done. The same thing applies for your UPSC preparation, when everybody goes through a different journey, even though you are reading the same subjects and will appear in the examination on the same day. Your journey will be very different from the journey of the person sitting next to you in the examination. And it does pay to find your own way in this examination and in life, where a set pattern of best practices is not promised to lead you anywhere. Of course, best practices have their advantages and they have their place in our lives. But better practices are there to best practices. There are better practices than best practices, and those better practices are creativity, thinking about things from a new perspective, innovating, figuring out new problems and different solutions to those problems, right? And a different solution to that problem, for example, when you think about the problem of climate change, for example, and radical alternatives which are being proposed for it, which can be proposed for it, are examples. Use big data, use cloud seeding technology, use carbon capture. Uh, all of these different ideas are not, they didn't exist before. There are many people who are working on the water problem, and people say that humans will run out of fresh water very soon because our populations are overinflated. And so people say that we are not going to run out of water because there's plenty of water in the oceans, and we don't have a water problem, we have a salt problem. They're figuring out different ways to solve that salt problem. If you can desalinate ocean water, then there is no dearth of water in the world. This is an example of creative thinking. They're figuring out creative ways to do it. It has never been done before. It has its own complications. But the idea of better practices and best practices revolves around this. You can touch upon, like I said, themes of conformity, themes of rigidness, compare the two, and then come to a conclusion and say that there are certain aspects of life, including during development or including during our lives, where best practices are actually best because they have survived the test of time. But at the same time, there is always scope for improvement, and the world, nature, and the environment around us continues to throw at us different challenges which might not be amenable to best practices. A very good example is the Omicron variant. The best practices for the other variant don't apply to it. It doesn't care, right? A new approach is required. So to deal with novelty, we cannot have best practices. We require better practices to best practices. And perhaps then in that sense, the best practice is to balance what is the best practice and to figure out new and better ways to solve our older problems. With that, I come to the end of this session, which has been exhaustive and lengthy, but I've discussed all of these topics in detail. I hope you've gotten the idea of how to deconstruct them, how to get at the heart of them, and how to be able to analyze them. Please notice that I didn't form any opinions. I didn't form judgments. I gave you some ideas of the intertwined debates of the topic, what is at the heart of the topic, what themes should be touched upon, what type of analysis can be done, what type of content can be used. Now, in the resources that I have linked, the article on dimensional analysis, deconstruction, you will find many of these resources, many of these techniques listed in detail. Okay, so you have plenty of information with you and you should be able to use it to your advantage. This essay paper was not different from any other essay paper. In fact, it was exactly on the same lines. It is exactly, and it is likely to be on the same lines next year and the year after that also. The way you handle these ideas and how maturely, the level of maturity you bring to the table in analyzing them, your depth of understanding and the neatness of your organization will determine your marks. That will never change, regardless of how abstract the topics become. Thank you, and have a good week ahead. And I hope that you have learned a lot from all of the things that I've said. And I hope that you continue to learn and to stay curious. Thank you.